Hi, good afternoon. Assuming most of you are in the Eastern time zone or beyond, and or so it's a good afternoon, good evening, or good morning. As Dan Sinor says, it's February 6th, Thursday at 3 p.m. in New York, but I'm in Washington. So anyway, I'm Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt, chairman and founder of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, which is a coalition of hundreds of rabbis. 1,000 are affiliated with our network, who are committed to promoting Jewish unity with Israel, and to understanding in both directions the nature of what's going on. So there's nobody better than our guest today, Michael Oren, to offer clarity to the current situation, which in fact actually is the name of his Substack. Very appropriate. Michael is no stranger to any of us, I'm sure. Michael is a scholar and historian who has written a number of important books about the Middle East, including his experience as ambassador to the United States between 2009 to 2013. He's currently also the Joe Gildenhorn Fellow at the Wilson Institute for Peace in Washington. Michael currently has recently established the Israel Advocacy Group. He's been very involved in helping to explain Israel's position in the world. And so this is a natural for him. In addition to that, as I mentioned, he is publishing a regular column in Substack, and the column is called Clarity. And in addition to that, he does a bi-weekly podcast with Aviva Klampus called Bundles, Boundless Insights. Um,
Boundless insights.
Boundless insights. I couldn't read my own writing. Sorry about that.
Right.
And so before I introduce Michael, I just want to mention, by the way, that our next podcast webinar is going to be on next Thursday afternoon, when we'll be look for it. We'll be interviewing Giddy Greenstein, who is going to be talking with us about some thoughts about the day after in Gaza. In addition to that, also then in March 11th, we're going to be having our session to talk about the World Zionist Congress and explain what that's all about. Jewish alphabet soup, as I like to call it. Our talk a week or two ago with Gil Troy is available both on our website, and pleased to let you know that we're going to be posting these conversations on the Jewish Podcast.fm. And there you'll be able to find these, as well as our upcoming conference in May for the fourth annual Zionist Rabbinic Coalition Conference, which we hope you'll be able to join. So with that, Michael is there's so much to talk about. We're going to go straight to it, and it's great
Where
to
do we
have you.
begin? Where do we
Michael's a,
begin, Stuart?
Michael's been a good friend
Good to be with
from
you. Good to be
here
with
in
you. All right,
Washington,
good
so
to.
we'll jump right in. Michael, the first question I want to ask you then is the one that I think is probably most present on everyone's mind, and that is in terms of the Trump plan for Gaza. Among the things I'd like to ask you to address, and then anything else you'd like to share with us. Number one, was it a surprise? Obviously, number two, what to make of it? And I think people are trying to figure out, is this good or not? Should we be for it or against it? What suggestions do you have about how to respond to this, and your thoughts about it? So, Michael, with that, it's all yours. And Baruch haba, welcome. It's great to see you.
Well, I hope you can all hear me. My internet, like the Middle East says, is unstable, so I hope this doesn't get cut off. It is great to be with you, Stuart. It is a great kavod li to be with the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. You guys are doing outstanding work always, and we're deeply appreciative of it. I just had a conversation with a prominent American Jewish newspaper editor. I won't mention names here, but it was an extraordinary conversation that I had to admit that I was wrong. It's not easy for anybody in Israeli public life to say those words, I was wrong. And it wasn't just that I was wrong. I had very good company. Those of us who were trying to get a sense of where Donald Trump was in terms of our issues, Israel, the Middle East, what kind of positions he would take in his now second term. We all based ourselves on the Donald Trump of the first term. And the Donald Trump of the first term was transactional. Everything was a deal, a deal, a deal, a deal. The best deal of the century, a new deal with Iran. He was against annexation when annexation was attempted by the government of Israel. He was in favor of the two-state solution. I actually served as an advisor to the deal of the century, which, if you look at it, is in fact a two-state solution, different than, say, the Obama plan, the Clinton plan, but a two-state solution nevertheless. He expressed a open interest in negotiating with Iran, avoiding further wars in the Middle East, doesn't like wars, wants to end wars, certainly forever wars. this was Donald Trump had a certain connection with Israel, affection for Israel, but we assumed, and I assumed that when he was elected, Netanyahu and his government would have a very limited maneuverability. Joe Biden could say don't, and everybody did. The Israelis did, the Palestinians did, the Iranians did, everyone did. When Donald Trump says don't, people who do will be in very hot water. And yes, there was a lot of celebration, certainly among the Israeli right, about Trump's victory in the election. But in fact, in many ways, we were about to become the 51st state in terms of our maneuverability. You couldn't say no to this man so easily. And it turned out that I and everyone else was wrong, at least to base it on what we heard 2 nights ago in that press conference, which was something very different, where there was an intimation of a possible White House support for annexation, no mention of peace with the Palestinians, no mention of a two-state solution, and in its place was this idea, an idea that had been floated by his special envoy Stephen Witkoff several weeks before. He talked about relocating several million Palestinians to Indonesia for a period of time, about 10 years, in order to affect the reconstruction of Gaza. You have to completely reconstruct Gaza, and you can't do that when there's 2.5 million refugees sitting in tents on top of all the rubble, and there's maybe tens of thousands of unexploded ordnances lying around, munitions. And that sort of in a practical sense, he's probably right. And then all of a sudden, after the visit of the first foreign leader to the White House, who just happened to be the prime minister of the one and only Jewish state with all of 10 million population, Netanyahu, Trump comes out with a completely different idea. Comes out about removing the Gaza population to Egypt, Jordan, or wherever. Again, not quite clear how long it's going to be. Gaza will be reconstructed. Not quite sure those Palestinians are coming back, according to what he's saying. And the Gaza Strip will be turned into the Riviera of the Middle East. And foursquare support for the state of Israel. He had a line in this conference that I'd never heard him say before, and I hosted him in Israel. I had worked with his administration. He said that the United States and Israel will take the lead in bringing about an entirely new peaceful Middle East. That I had not heard. I'd heard affection for Israel, I heard support for Israel, but nothing that intense, nothing that fervent and ardent from the President of the United States. And there was an assumption, again, a wrong assumption, that Trump going into his second term, and one would assume his final term, that he owed nothing to nobody, right? He didn't know anything to his evangelical base. He didn't owe anything to the Jews. He had no electoral concerns, and that would make him even less disposed to adopting a categorically pro-Israel position. So something happened in the mind, the heart, the soul of this man to have a different Donald Trump come out and meet that press conference. Now, having said all that, what does it all mean? Now, I'm basing myself on press reports that said he didn't consult with anybody. He did no planning. In fact, that maybe it is perhaps that even Netanyahu himself was surprised by the president's position on Gaza. Surprised. Having said all that, what are the realistic, practical ramifications of this? How do you actually move, these millions of Palestinians away, especially if Egypt and Jordan, no one wants to take them. Everyone has come out, all these countries have come out and said categorically they do not want to accept Palestinians. They will not accept Palestinians. And how do you actually get Americans in there? Now the White House has denied they're talking about American troops. They still want Israeli troops to take care of the security aspect of Gaza, but how is this actually affected? How do you get whatever contingents of American developers, builders, construction workers into Gaza to actually rebuild the place? How does this actually work? Now, in the last 48 hours, there have been tremendous attempts to try to impose a certain sort of external logic on Mr. Trump's internal mind. So according to one interpretation, he's basically pulling a Canada and Mexico here, or more directly, he's revisiting the 2019 diplomatic legerdemain in which he used annexation, the threat of annexation, to compel the Emiratis to make peace with Israel. And the deal was that Israel was going to annex Area C of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, but was willing to forfeit that option if it got as a compensation peace with UAE. Now again, Canada, Mexico, tariffs, 25% tariffs. You throw that out there, and the Canadians and the Mexicans start making concessions. And what will be these concessions here? That in return for not occupying Gaza, not relocating the population of Gaza, the Saudis would make peace with Israel without having to get in return, a quid pro quo of a Palestinian state, which is their current demand. Even Hamas could agree to relocate peacefully elsewhere to demilitarize the Gaza Strip in return for a promise not to occupy the Gaza Strip on the part of the United States. You following this logic? Now, there's a more cynical logic that this is simply a real estate deal, that there's immense amounts of money to be made. And so we're talking about deluxe beachfront property. I remember, we used to visit the Israeli settlements in Gush Katif. And they had gorgeous beaches. You go for a weekend, it'd be terrific. Yeah. But you could do that with the Hiltons and the Four Seasons and, and Trump Towers along that beachfront. And, Steve Whitaker's also comes from the world of development with lots of development money, perhaps from the Qataris, with whom Steve has had a lot of business. So these were the interpretations. At the end of the day, we don't know. We know nothing. But here's what I do know. Is that by just throwing out these ideas, Trump has changed the discourse. Now, some of you may have read the article I published in the Free Press in the last 24 hours, which talked about this in detail, because the nostrums of the past 30 years that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the core conflict of the Middle East, and the only way of solving that conflict was by the creation of a Palestinian state. That approach has been disproven and failed multiple times, but it has come back with a vengeance in the aftermath of October 7th. Even though the fact the majority of his Palestinians support Hamas, even don't even want that two-state solution, and certainly the Israelis don't, but it's come back with a vengeance on the part of within liberal camps, not just in the United States but in Europe and universally globally. No one's ever really challenged it, certainly not the level at the White House, and that's what President Trump did. But he was basically saying was the core of the conflict is not Israel or Israeli policies. The core of the conflict are the Palestinians. Now he ascribed Palestinian militancy to bad socioeconomic conditions. But it's basically saying the fault lies with the Palestinians. And in order to address and resolve this source, we're going to have to move them out and create an entirely different environment for them. And that, now that it's out there, people are going to have to discuss it. And I want to go a little bit granular with you. And that is those who talk about the day after scenario, and I don't know what Giddy Greenstein's going to say, and I know what other people have said. I don't even know what I've written. But the fact of the matter is, there really is right now no day after scenario. The Biden administration, to a man, to a woman, was insistent that the Palestinian Authority be given that assignment of governing Gaza in the post-war period. But the fact of the matter is, we all remember back in 2005 when the Palestinian Authority took over Gaza, and the United States sent a high-level military mission to Gaza under the three-star general named Keith Dayton, and they trained them intensely. They trained PA policemen intensely in American combat methods. It took exactly 3 days in 2007 for Hamas to overthrow them, and literally overthrow them. They cast about 600 of these guys off the top of roofs in Gaza. So how is anything going to be different now? We're all witnessing the fighting going around Jenin. The fighting is going around Jenin is because the Palestinian Authority is actually incapable of controlling the West Bank. It's incapable of overcoming Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other jihadist groups, even in its own backyard. How far is Jenin from Ramallah? Not that far. And so let's be realistic. You're going to stick a bunch of PA officials in there. Within 24, maximum 48 hours, they'll all be dead. Certainly, if Hamas still has guns, and Hamas is still going to have guns, who's going to have guns? And who's going to take away the guns from Hamas? Because as we are on the cusp of the possible second phase in this withdrawal in the ceasefire, if we go into that second phase, let's be frank, maybe we'll get the hostages back. Maybe we'll get most of the hostages back. My working assumption is that we won't get all of the hostages back. that Hamas will keep a few for quote unquote a rainy day, and say, oh, we don't know where they are. We have no record of these people. That's what they'll say. And then it'll get leaked out that they do. Um, they're going to hold on to those hostages, and Hamas is going to be back in Gaza. And so, what day after scenario works here? And I can't think of any day after scenario that is more realistic than the one that President Trump described, frankly, because do you expect the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to send forces to Gaza and to fight for Israel's security? Because every one of them will be perceived as collaborators with us. So there's really right now no clear day after scenario. You can put a couple of PA inspectors along the Philadelphia route. You can do that, but they're not going to be patrolling the streets of Khan Yunis and Jabalia. There's just no way they're going to take on Hamas. They're not capable.
So if I understand what you're saying,
right
Michael,
now,
go ahead. Yeah. If I understand what you're saying,
right now,
this is the ultimate disruption, so to speak, and
right
trying
now,
to.
I would not rule out the possibility that if, in some way, the Israeli army can go in there and complete the job of uprooting Hamas to the greatest degree possible, then American contractors would come into Gaza and undertake the reconstruction of Gaza, along with, say, Saudi capital or Qatar capital. That could definitely happen. And so I wouldn't rule it out. It's not as fantastic as it might seem. Last point, Stuart, and that is the Israeli army is exhausted. The Israeli army needs a break. And it was said to me by a colleague yesterday, if Bibi wants to go do a war, renew the war, it'd be very interesting. With what army?
So, in many respects, if I understand what you're saying, there's a certain logic to the uh, irrational disruption of what Trump is proposing, and it may be
Yeah.
better than anything else. But let me ask you this: what about two aspects of this? Number one, the countries who have publicly said no, this is terrible. First of all, I find it very ironic that when Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and other countries have said no, this would be terrible, and the reason they've said is because it would be so difficult and tough for our security. It'll be a security threat to have all these Palestinians here with us. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute. What about the fact that it's a security threat to Israel? How come nobody, how come they haven't remembered that? Number one. Number two, as you well know, as a diplomat, there are things that are said publicly and privately, which sometimes are often different. And the last thing is, there are those who are saying, well, how can they be taken out of their homes? If that's their home, then how can they still want to be able to take over Israel? And if it is their home, how can they still be refugees? In other words, there are some internal contradictions that are brought out by the fact that this is just such a revolutionary idea.
Yeah. And I think you make a very good point. Why does nobody want Palestinians? Why in 1991 did Kuwait overnight kick out 400,000 Palestinians? Right? They don't want them because Palestinians are known as, what can I say, troublemakers. Where they go, it's revolution. Where they go, there's terror. And Egypt doesn't want them in the Sinai because Egypt and the Sinai has enough problems with ISIS. Jordan doesn't want it because the majority of its population is already Palestinians, and it could tip the balance, and the Hashemite dynasty could go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reality of it. People don't want them, and at least not in the Middle East. They don't want them. I would love to see them go to Ireland.
Yeah, they deserve that.
And Spain.
Michael, so any advice for those of us who are on this call right now in terms of how to respond to that? Because already people are lining up. There are those who are saying, "Oh, this is ethnic cleansing and that and so on and so forth." And there are other and without even thinking about the fact that what, maybe this is out of the box. Last tagline on this question here is, there are those who have been working on this for over 50 years. They've come with the same solutions, the two-state solution, et cetera. As you as a diplomat know, it really was not that they could have had a state if they would have wanted one earlier. So what do you suggest would be a response to friends and if rabbis who are on the call are asked by colleagues, by congregants, what do you think about this plan? What would you recommend?
Well, I would go back to say, and listen, it's kind of granular, right? To say, let's game this out. What does a day after scenario actually look like?
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to the two-state solution discourse, Stuart, where people say, the only solution is a two-state solution, and everybody knows what that solution looks like. Okay? But of course, no one knew what it looked like. And when you ask them, okay, what does this Palestinian state look like? Is it a democracy? Is it a totalitarian state? Is it an Islamist state? What is the extent of its sovereignty? Can it make a defense pact with Iran? Can it admit Iranian Syrian troops to its territory? Start asking all these questions, and there are no answers. Well, the same thing goes with the day after scenario. Everyone says there's got to be a day after scenario. Okay, but what does it look like? And it is the answer you're going to get bear even a passing resemblance to the reality in the field on the ground. So again, you want to say, oh, we'll bring the Palestinian Authority back to Gaza. Yeah, they're going to stand up against Hamas for how long? You could probably get it on your watch. To the last of them is cast off the last standing rooftop. And yeah, you're going to get an inter-Arab force there. Yeah, are they going to stand up to Hamas? How physically are they to affect this reconstruction? And there, I think Stephen Witkoff makes a point. You've got these hundreds of thousands of refugees sitting on this rubble and also sitting on unexploded shells. And how do you then move them in such a way so that you can reconstruct Gaza? You can do it. We see skyscrapers being built in downtown Manhattan. You can do it, but it's not easy, and it's dangerous, and I don't know who's going to do it. So
Michael, let me ask you this:
when you actually get down to the actual nitty gritty of what a day after scenario looks like, guess what? Nobody knows.
Was it foolish for people to say, "Gee, there's no a day after scenario"? Do you think just a short answer on that?
I couldn't hear you. What was that?
A short answer on the question. A few months ago, people were saying, "Gee, Israel doesn't have a day after scenario. That's terrible. They need to have one." Do you think that was like just I don't know, a bogus kind of an issue that was raised that didn't
I
need
mean,
to
from
be?
my perspective, I think we should have just given any day after scenario. Okay, I wrote about it in the Times of Israel. I wrote about it in Sapir Journal. I wrote about days after scenarios, which were pretty much what there was a task force formed under Netanyahu's aegis of some prominent American Jews. You probably know some of them. They came to Israel and they devised a day after scenario, which wasn't far removed from what I had written in Sapir magazine. And at the end of the day, none of these programs would be easily or even remotely applicable or implementable. And but we should have published that. We should have adopted them anyway, because it would have taken a lot of heat off of us. I was always about giving time and space to the IDF. And if to come out to adopt one of these plans would have given time and space to the IDF, great. But what, say, for example, David Petraeus wanted us to do was to to free and lock down. So you go into a certain neighborhood in the Deir al-Balach refugee camp, you clear it of Hamas, and then you give it over to the PA to hold. And you give a lot of, medical services and aid to the people living there, and then they become pro PA. Get the PA to distribute the aid, okay? And people would be beholden to PA. They'll be dead. They'll be dead.
We've seen that movie before. But let
They'll be
me ask you
dead.
this, as we're
Yes.
talking about this, and Michael, you recently wrote about the goals of the current war with Hamas, that America and Israel may have different goals and that they may have changed recently. You actually wrote that right before the Trump plan. What do you think are Israel's goals now? And do we get to phase two? What are your thoughts about what's going to be happening in this regard?
Here, I actually don't know. About Gaza, I can't know. The overwhelming majority of Israelis want those hostages back, and they understand the price. And sort of the regnant view is this is the price for failing October 7th. There was another article I wrote in the Free Press. This is the price for our failure of October 7th. We have to pay it. This is what our army brought on us. And we'll get our hostages back, and we will catch our breath militarily, and we'll stock up on ammunition, and we'll wait for the next time. Next time we finish the job. That's the best we can do. I hope that the government's focus is actually elsewhere. That in order to really destroy Hamas, get a total victory over, you've got to dry up their supply. And the way to dry up the supply is by cutting the hose. And where does that hose lead? It leads to Iran.
Sure.
And my hope was that the great goal of Netanyahu's visit to Washington would be a coordinated policy now toward Iran. Certainly in the first day, eliminating its nuclear facilities. If Iran is, as reported, about to create a crude nuclear device. And I think that President Trump there was, I think, more unequivocal in saying that he would not tolerate that, and that the United States is committed to stopping it. And perhaps along the line, finding ways that we can find a new government in Iran.
So again, there's the public diplomacy, and there's the things that we don't know about. Neither of us were in the meetings with the prime minister and the president. Do you think that Iran was on the table and being discussed?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Now,
Um,
again, I want to proceed on the assumption,
mhm.
and this is not just based on Trump. This is not just based on Trump 46, Trump 44, 45. This is based on things he said recently, that he prefers to negotiate with Iran rather than take on Iran militarily. And among Israelis who follow this very closely, the concern would be that Trump would reach a nuclear deal with Iran that's only marginally better than the JCPOA and then declare victory. So it's very important we be part of that discussion. But Trump, unlike Biden, is not removing the military option from the table. Biden removed that option. And the Iranians are afraid. I think the Iranians, in announcing or leaking that they are getting close to building a crude nuclear device, they're pulling a Canada and Mexico tariff on Trump. They're ratcheting up the demands as a precursor to negotiations.
Or maybe they want to be bombed. That's another possibility.
Somehow, my old professor Bernard Lewis used to say that mutually assured destruction for the Iranians is not deterrence; it's incentive.
Yeah. So in regard to the current goals and the with Hamas, we're in the middle of a period of a ceasefire right now. There are those who say, okay, we should, do what we can to get the rest of the hostages out. There are those who say, no, we've got to really continue in order to obliterate, to defeat Hamas. And there are those who say that the reason for that second position is political considerations. Having been on the inside, as member of Knesset, ambassador, and discussions with the prime minister, what is your sense as to the role that internal politics have to do with this decision, or is it really statesmanship? In other words, what I'm trying to get at is sometimes we read in the American press that Bibi has to be beholden to his right wing coalition, or is it that he really does feel that no, we actually have to defeat Hamas, or is it that he's trying to stay in office longer, or so on? And your thoughts about those?
Why do you put ors in between all of those possibilities? They're all possible. The answer to that is yes. Listen, politics always enters into every decision. I've never encountered any decision made in government, either in the United States or Israel, that didn't involve some political considerations. The question is the balance. I was talking to one of a former very close advisor to Netanyahu the other day. He hasn't been in touch with him for a while, but we worked with him very closely for years. And we were discussing about the narrative in Israel that Netanyahu is willing to stay in office at the price of Israeli blood, keeping Israeli soldiers dying in Gaza, keeping hostages dying in the tunnels, even though the deal that was offered, which Israel actually devised last May, all right. If Israel had accepted this last May, maybe all of these Israelis would still be alive. And Bibi does this in order to stay in office. It's become sort of a conventional wisdom that Bibi pays for his continued place in government through Israeli lives, to say nothing of Palestinian lives. And this advisor was saying to me, he says, unless this man has undergone some radical personal transformation over the last couple of years, and here was a person who I knew and he knew both, that whenever there was a military death, he took it deeply personally because of his brother, and was physically almost impaired by it. Just how deep that pain was. And it wasn't the Bibi we knew. Just wasn't the Bibi we knew. Now, maybe he's gone through some radical transformation. Maybe he's just been, too long in government and crazed by the constant attacks against him and his family. We don't know. The other narrative says that Netanyahu needs to stay in government, not just because he likes staying in government, but because he doesn't want to appear in court with the 3 corruption charges against him as Mr. Netanyahu and not Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he won't have those defenses. One of the ironies of the past decade is that those who maybe thought that Bibi would fall as a result of these trials got it wrong. It's because of the trials that he actually stays in government, according to another narrative, right? And They got that exactly wrong. It's a boomerang. And you got to you believe that or you don't. But maybe it's a consideration. At the end of the day, I do think there's a maybe a paramount consideration for Netanyahu. That's his legacy. How does he want to be remembered? And this is a person with a profound sense of history, which he inherited from his historian father, and who believes that literally at some level, maybe he won't tell you this, that he was born to save the Jewish people at a crucial and existential juncture in his life, and that and no one else can do this. Stuart, you know where I live. I live in Jaffa, and I live in an area. I belong to a shul that's very Mizrahi and working class. And you talk to the people there; they love Bibi, and they don't, they, think he is. I don't say the king, but they say he's,
Yeah.
he's the man. And one of the things they say, and that has a lot of merit, is that you look along the Israeli political landscape, and you don't really see anybody else who could have withstood the pressures of this war like Bibi did. And
And
the
the pressures
constant
of
pressures
Biden,
from
and
the
not to
Biden
go the
administration, constant pressures, constant. He withstood them and never broke. Never broke, though, depends how you define break. He did delay going into Rafah. He did delay going
yeah.
into Lebanon for a long time. But uh, who's got, I think Netanyahu understands that another Israeli leader, maybe a Benny Gantz or the other P, would be incapable of running this country at this crucial juncture.
Look, you've worked with him much more closely. I've met him a few times. I've read his autobiography. I think those who accuse him of wanting to not take seriously the death of Israeli soldiers is an obscene comment. I think that he is driven by a sense of purpose, mission, and so on, and feels that how important it is to defeat Hamas. And that's one of the reasons why the release of the hostages of the prisoners is so disturbing to so many. Do you think on our last call, Giltroy said that maybe it's time to begin to think about the death penalty. With your travels in Israel, do you think there's going to be a reassessment of the instituting the death
Absolutely.
penalty? Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we have to. It's not a moral issue anymore. It's an existential issue. We
So
can't live
so
like this. We
so
can't live this. And I want to just revisit a position that I took back in 2016 when I was in Knesset. That was very controversial at the time. Now, if you're a soldier in the IDF, you have orders when you can fire, when you can't fire. And according to long-standing order, if you encounter a terrorist or terrorist attack, you shoot at that terrorist until he's neutralized. Now, what's that term? Neutralized. An 18, 19-year-old kid is not a doctor. He doesn't know the terrorist has been neutralized. He can't go over and take his pulse because maybe take the pulse, the terrorist who's still alive, jump up and stick a knife in his back or press a button and blow everybody up, right? Who knows? And back in 2016, there was the case of Elor Azaria. Some of you may remember him. He was an Israeli infantryman who was present in Hebron at a terrorist attack. The terrorist was lying on the floor, bleeding but alive. And Elor Azaria came over and put a bullet in his head and was arrested and put on trial. And it led to a partial collapse of the Israeli government. That's when Bogi Ya'alon resigned as defense minister. Yvette Lieberman came in, big shuffling, and huge controversy within Israeli society. In a way, it was a Jewish state, democratic state type of debate, and interesting. And I supported that camp that said that Elor Azaria should stand trial, and if he's found guilty, should go to jail because he violated the rules of the IDF. Other people thought he should be given an award. And in fact, in the end, he was sent to prison for a while and then pardoned and got out to a hero's welcome. But having said that, I also said that while Elor Azaria was guilty of violating IDF regulations, I said the IDF regulations are stupid. They're stupid because an 18, 19-year-old kid doesn't know when a terrorist is neutralized. And secondly, every terrorist who leaves his or her house in the morning to go out and kill Jews has to know he or she are not coming back. There's no coming back from a terrorist operation. What happens now is that they know not only do they not come back, but they get paid while they're in prison by the PA, the pay for slay, and they come out rich people who are carried on the shoulders of all their countrymen. And they will then, a part of them will go back and commit terror. So my feel that not only do we have to enact the death penalty, but we have to change those open fire orders so that every terrorist knows they're not coming back.
Absolutely. I mean, the pain for the families who some of these terrorists have
Excruciating.
such blood on their hands and such cruelty. And I understand the recidivism rate is like over 80% of terrorists who are released
Of
as well.
course. Of course. And I know two families personally whose loved ones were murdered by terrorists who got out of jail this week.
Wow. I can only
Read,
imagine
read
the
the
pain.
columns in the Jerusalem Post by Micah Avni.
Thank you for
And
the
and
recommendation.
the killer of Ari Fuld got out too.
Yes, yes, I saw that. Michael, we were talking a bit about what's happening in terms of the proposals vis-a-vis Hamas and Gaza and the Palestinians and things like that. One, and we've touched upon Iran, another big player, Saudi Arabia. And of course, that's very prominent on everyone's mind as well. Your sense of what to anticipate in that regard?
Well, there's been a trajectory in Saudi policy. Saudi Arabia has said that in the past it was willing to make peace with Israel in return for Israel's willingness to discuss the P word, the pathway to a Palestinian state. And I've said repeatedly that we should do that because a pathway is a thing with gravel. It doesn't necessarily lead to a Palestinian state. It's just a pathway. I think that would be a very impossible demand for certain members of Netanyahu's coalition. They want to discuss the pathway, but I think it would be a decent price to pay in return for a peace with the leader of the Sunni world. Because peace with Saudi Arabia is not just peace with Saudi Arabia; it's peace with Indonesia, with Malaysia, potentially even with Pakistan, and these are Sunni countries. But now, in recent months and more intensely recent weeks, the Saudis have jacked up their price. And they're saying they're not talking about the P word. You actually have to create a Palestinian state. Has to be created before they will enter into negotiations with us. So they've jacked up their price. There's an interesting interpretation of this that appeared in the Haaretz newspaper several days ago that said one of the reasons for the Saudi change, the hardening of Saudi's position, had nothing to do with what was going on in Gaza. It had to do with the fact that Israel had so weakened Iran. And one of the main, say, impetus for Saudi Arabia to make peace with us was because they're afraid of Iran. Well, they're a lot less afraid of Iran now, so that the need for that peace with us is also diminished.
That's interesting. Tell me this in terms of the recent change in that your successor, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, is now the one
Mm.
who is going, and by the way, who urged me to establish the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, is replacing the head of the Shin Bet for negotiations in Qatar. So does that? What do you think that signals? What is the
Well,
significance behind that?
we know that Ron. Many of you know Ron is an extremely capable person, but beyond his many talents is his closeness to the prime minister. There's no one who's closer to Bibi,
Right.
and that means that wants to control these negotiations very, very carefully. And there have been leaks from these negotiations. There have been lots of back and forth opposition to Bibi's position. He knows that Ron will not oppose him, and he knows that Ron will not leak, and he knows that Ron will report accurately and faithfully what's going on and carry out the prime minister's instructions.
So, not necessarily a strategic difference then per se. What do you think about the role of Qatar, by the way, and how they should be dealt with? They are financing, anti-Semitic demonstrations across the country as well as on academic levels and so on. It seems as if they're trying to play both sides. Do you think there will
Well,
be a
not
reckoning?
doesn't seem they play both sides, but we need them now. Clearly, we need them to help get these hostages back. And there was a report that came out, I don't know, several weeks ago that on October 8th, 9th, 10th, during Tony Blinken's first trip to the Middle East, the Qataris suggested that they would oust the Hamas leaders from Doha. And it was Blinken who said, no, don't do that. We need you, that we need them there so we can negotiate. And so they have that role. But once this war is behind us, I think that the United States and the West should revisit its relationship with Qatar and give it a choice. You either give up all your connections to terror, or we're going to designate you a terrorist supporting nation, and you will not have access to international banking routes, to the SWIFT, and we will close down all those nice American year abroad programs that you have in Qatar. Maybe we'll even outlaw Al Jazeera because it's a wing of a terrorist organization. Many things, but I think that's a necessary step in the future.
Michael, I'll never forget years ago, you and I were together. I won't even mention with whom or where. And a young man who was about 12 years old came up and asked you at the time, of all the countries that hate you, who hates you the most? Um, when you were Israel's ambassador. How would you answer that question today?
Same way, Iran, Iran, Iran. I think I started my time with Turkey being a very friendly country, and we were
I
doing
was going to
actually
ask,
joint
what
events with
about
the
Turkey
Turkish
these days?
embassy.
Yes.
Yeah, and and very quickly, Turkey went from being a close friend to being a regional adversary in the backer of Hamas and Islamic extremists. Erdogan is a backer of, or even a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Um, and with all that, and Turkey poses numerous challenges to Israel, certainly on the Syrian front. Um, and Turkey's not Iran. The Turkish government, its raison d'etre is not the destruction of the state of Israel. They don't call for the destruction of the state of Israel every week or even every day, as the Iranian regime does. They're not supporting terror around the world the way the Iranian regime does. They're not, backing Hezbollah and these militias and the Houthis. Now they have relations with Hamas. That's true. And even Erdogan. Erdogan has a population that, part of it is actually lives in Europe, and he's a member of NATO. And Erdogan also has a sort of a bifurcated plan, because not only is he an Islamist, he's a neo-Ottomanist,
He's
and
claimed, in
literally
fact, that
believes,
Jerusalem
seriously
should
believes,
be returned to Turkey, right?
yes, it literally believes that people in the Middle East are pining nostalgically for the return of the Ottoman Empire. And big surprise. I don't think anybody misses the Ottoman Empire except for Erdogan. And not that, and if you miss the Soviet Union and Ukraine and those countries as well, Azerbaijan. So that's Erdogan. He is a problem. He's a threat, but he's not in the same league with Iran.
Okay, so going back to Iran, um, is there any alternative to taking out their nuclear capability in a military operation?
Yeah, bring the regime down. Those same facilities in another government's hands are not the same magnitude of threat.
Okay, so is that at all? Is that as pie in the sky as the military option?
No, neither is. Neither is a pie in the sky.
They're both scenarios that are possible. Okay. Moving from Iran to what's happening in Judea and Samaria, especially in terms of Jenin.
Mm.
We've seen in recent weeks a severe crackdown. Is that kind of because of the fact that, first of all, weapons are being smuggled in, and or that Israel does not want to allow another October 7th to occur? Help us on this call understand a little better as to what Israel's goals and what it's doing and what its goals are there and why it's necessary.
Over the past 2 years, prior to October 7th, 2023, Iran was trying to smuggle large munitions into Judea and Samaria, and to train the terrorists there. IDF has now uncovered both tunnel shafts as well as homemade rockets. And was trying to basically Gazify Judea and Samaria. To the Iranians, the Iranians have been trying to undermine Jordan and Jordanian stability. And the Palestinian Authority has proven completely incapable of dealing with this. And the center of this activity, the Iran-backed Sunni Islamist activity, is in Samaria. So it's going to be in Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarm, Kalkilia, and
Appropriately named, I've always thought. Go ahead. I'll
and
kill you.
and the PA is not capable. PA would like to show that it's capable of suppressing Hamas, and they tried several weeks ago. They did a big operation. They actually killed several Palestinian terrorists, but they couldn't sustain it.
Mm. And then, as we're looking in that area, also, last time you and I had spoken, one of the great concerns was about Hezbollah and the amount of weapons that they had there, and that was going to present a great challenge. There are those who feel that maybe Israel entered into the negotiations and ceasefire with Hezbollah too soon, because they still can be a presence in the Lebanese government or in Lebanon. What is your assessment about Lebanon and especially vis-a-vis the role of Hezbollah now?
Well, I was ambivalent. I was ambivalent about it. I had served in the Army last summer, you recall, and I was up north. And it had a profound effect on me. I also, through my advocacy group, the Israel Advocacy Group, I brought two delegations of displaced Israelis to Washington over the summer. We were in both houses of Congress, both parties. We ended up in the White House both times with the president's staff because there wasn't much awareness of the North in Washington. And so I was very deeply connected to the North and what was going on up North. And I saw the extent of the destruction, particularly in places like Metula, and 250 houses destroyed. And so on one hand, I knew that the army, again, was tired. The army was low on ammunition, very low on ammunition. We were counting artillery shells. And Hezbollah was not going to be destroyed. We couldn't destroy Hezbollah. We could just downgrade Hezbollah. So there was a trade-off. How much longer we would go on to downgrade Hezbollah. On one hand, but on the other hand, could we reach a ceasefire that would convince 80,000 Israelis to go back to their homes in the north? And at the end, I don't know, lesser of two evils, we struck this deal. And the best we can hope for is that the Lebanese army, again, we're going to have the same problem we had in Gaza. The Lebanese army is going to go into South Lebanon. You think the Lebanese army can stand up to Hezbollah? If anybody tries to stand up to Hezbollah, they'll be dead. It is not. It's not going to happen. Unless they're willing to embark on another civil war, it's not going to happen. And any more than it would happen in Gaza. And it is a very difficult situation because we hope. My feeling is at some point Hezbollah will violate the agreement. They violate it on a small scale every day. They'll do it on a larger scale. Then you have to convince Trump that the violations are of a magnitude that they justify breaking the ceasefire on our side. And that won't be easy. That will not be easy because, again, I'm going to go on the assumption still that this man does not like war.
So we still don't have the residents have not been able to move back into their homes in the north, correct? When will we see that?
But they're not some are not willing, right?
So when you talk about the organization, the Israel Advocacy Group, and then you came here and you've met with members of Congress and others to try and bring the message. One of the things you've been involved in as a diplomat, as a historian and academician and everything else, obviously, is helping people to understand better Israel's cause. And it's no secret that people will often say that the Hasbara, explaining Israel's cause. Yeah. So what do you think?
It wasn't terrible. It was non-existent in this war. That's why I founded the organization. That's why I founded IAG. It was pretty much non-existent. The few people they had were either fired or they quit because they didn't get paid. We basically had almost no public diplomacy here, and that's why many of you see me on the news every day. That's all through IAG, and working with a PR firm in Washington. I do it myself, like a one-man foreign ministry. I'm on television repeatedly today, tomorrow. But I say this not with pride. I say this with sorrow because I'm actually doing a job that should be done by the state of Israel.
What do you think is the most effective arguments you've been able to have you had success whether it's on with a hostile media or encountering maybe a individual political leader who perhaps is not that sympathetic? What have you found to be effective in helping them to understand better Israel's position, if not to change their minds?
All you can do is listen. You have a voice that's not necessarily the voice of the government Israel. I'd like to think of myself as being the voice of the people of Israel, being very clear and knowing all your facts. Every time they use that 47,000 number, okay, I stop the interview immediately, and I say that number is an anti-Semitic lie. And I explain why it's an anti-Semitic lie. I don't lose my temper. I explain. But if you deduct 20,000 terrorists from it, you deduct the several thousand Palestinians who were killed by Palestinian rockets falling short, and if you deduct the 6,000 Palestinians who, out of a population of 2.5 million over the course of 18 months, die of natural means, you've got a 1-to-1 ratio. And by the way, nobody knows who the Hamas health authorities are. No one has any idea, nor can they tell you on these. So you got to stop them. But you can do it in a way that, is not too combative, but you just get your point across. Because the 47,000 number is a blood libel. It is an anti-Semitic lie that has caused us real damage, by the way, huge damage. It is truly a blood libel. So this is what we can do. But it's also writing for the press. Those of you who read me in the press, like in the free press, which is very good to write for. I'd rather write for the New York Times, but they won't publish me. Uh, 'Cause that's the New York Times, unfortunately, right? But I don't want to preach to the converted. But in any
Wait, let
case,
me ask you a question. Hold on. Why
yeah.
do you think? I agree with you 100% that the media does have this bias. What do you think? What do you attribute that to? Here in
At
Washington, the Washington Post has been absolutely horrendous during this war.
horrendous, horrendous, horrendous.
Worst.
I actually came in and I briefed the editorial board of the Washington Post. So that's something you have to do. Okay, you hold your nose
Yeah,
and you go
Micah, you
in
didn't
there.
do too good a job. They're still doing the same stuff.
Same stuff didn't matter, but I shocked them. I said, yeah, I don't know how to tell you guys this, but you seem to be operating on the assumption that this conflict began on October 7th. This conflict began in 1920 with many massacres by the Palestinians, and you're taking it completely out of context. But there you go. You do this. You do your best. I still try to think. I still think in terms of time and space for the idea. If I can get on the BBC and get another minute of fighting, then I've done my job. Um, we also need to give chizuk to our own people because they're hearing the 47,000 every day too, and they're going to believe that Israel goes out to kill women and children because that's what they're being told dozens of times every day by the news. By the way, great Professor Abraham Wiener, University of Pennsylvania, will show you that statistically, Hamas statistics are statistically impossible. Impossible. There's not that many women and children in all of Gaza. Okay, really, it's crazy. But as I said, it's a blood libel. Guys, I'm going to have to stop in another minute. I got a program coming up. But
So
and last
closing
question,
words. No,
closing words.
feel free to give us your closing words of advice to those of us who are here on this, listening to you, who are obviously supporters and inclined and want to be advocates for Israel, as are you.
The most important thing is to know the facts. That fact about the 47,000, the fact that Israel militarily has won a battle which will be studied in West Point for the next 50 years. Okay, it is a military victory unequaled in modern military history. And I'm telling you, as the author of the book on the Six Day War, every bit as impressive in
Right.
many ways as the Battle of the 6 Days War. They're dinging me. Um, and you know, be aware that we are at this crucial juncture in the history of our state and the history of our people, facing immense challenges, many of which are unprecedented, at least since the 1930s. And this is a challenge, but it's also a great zchut. It's a great privilege to be alive and be Jewish right now, and to have the ability to step out and make a difference and to fight. And know that every time you go out there. From the line from Sefer Dvarim, when you see an enemy that's bigger and more powerful than you, fear not, for we're not alone.
We're not alone because Hashem is with us. So thank you, Michael. Thank
We're
you
not
both
alone.
for the taking time. I know you back-to-back interviews today,
Back to back.
and this is hopefully this is the
Anyway,
best one of the
Hazak
day.
Ve'ematz, Hazak Ve'ematz. Toda,
And thank
everybody.
you. And
All
to
right,
remind
take care,
everyone,
everybody.
please, you'll be able to
Bye.
pick this up on our webcast. Will be sent on our website, ZionistRabbis.org. In addition to that, we'll be looking for the call next week with Giddy Greenstein. Our call with Gil Troy is already live. And also, remember, please, that the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition will be holding its conference for rabbis in May 4th through 6th in Washington, D.C. We hope many of you will join us for that. And anyone, we certainly welcome your contributions and support of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, so that we can continue to offer the kinds of things that we do, which is to emphasize the importance of Jewish unity and support for Israel. So we wish everyone a good day. The website again is ZionistRabbis.org. Very easy to remember, ZionistRabbis.org. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. Take care.